Place all loose items in the pouch in front of you.
Have a safe and informative journey.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hartman, and this is Dreamfinders, a podcast about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. If there is one cultural touchstone that Disney theme parks might have helped to bring back from obscurity, it's Tiki Culture. While the Enchanted Tiki Room was in response to the burgeoning tiki craze of the late 50s and early 60s, when all the bars and rum joints closed down over the years, the Tiki Room remained and kept the culture around for later generations of fans to discover. One of those fans is today's guest, Tiki Tony. Inspired by island culture and his love of Disney, Tony has crafted mugs, made totems, and even had some of his artwork show up at Trader Sam's Enchanted Tiki Bar. But he also has a passion for bringing fans together, and he heads up the annual Disneyland Adventureland Day. Tony and I sat down to chat about his love of Tiki and how that came about, what the culture is like in the 21st century, and the altar-themed Tiki Hut workshop he has in his backyard. All of that and more is coming right up on Dreamfinders. Tiki Tony, welcome to Dreamfinders. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm stoked to be on.
So the name pretty much says it all. So let's start there. When did you remember first getting into Tiki culture?
You know what? When I was about 16, I started surfing. By 18, I was really interested in the history of surfing, and I found Hawaii. And then I really just started researching history or Hawaiian history and found tikis, and then also like the history of surfing in Southern California and how little tiki necklace gods kind of tied into that. And I grew up about an hour and a half away from Disneyland, so once a year we would go to Disneyland, and the Tiki Room was always a big part of it. I always loved it. And then when I was about 20 or so, I went with my nephew, who was a little kid, and seeing his eyes light up when he saw the Tiki Room come to life, that just like opened my world. I was like, oh, I was already starting to carve little tikis by then, but then seeing his eyes really light up, that really sparked a new kind of creative interest within Tiki for me, for sure.
So how did the internet, and specifically forums, also play a role in sort of bringing you into the culture? Because I know it's kind of a tight-knit group, and a post you made a while back online, you mentioned how many of you sort of ended up discussing and talking in the 2000s, as it were. What was that like? How did the internet help bring Tiki culture together for you?
That was a super cool experience. So I was selling, by that time, I was carving big palm tree tikis. I was at a Ventura swap meet selling my stuff, and some guy came to me. He's like, "Hey, have you heard of Tiki Central?" I was like, "No." So the internet was early then for me, especially. I hardly used it. So I found a group of people who were into Tiki stuff, and it was super cool, like finding out the whole history of like California Tiki bars and restaurants. I found the Book of Tiki, which was by Sven Kirsten. And then I think within a year of joining Tiki Central, I was selling at the Rose Bowl swap meet, and then I met Sven for the first time. That was super cool. And he bought something from me, and I was like, oh my God, like he's the father of the rebirth of Tiki, and he bought something from me. It was super cool. So it was such a neat time of like discovery and meeting people who were into it, and kind of rediscovering California Tiki history, which was through old Tiki mugs and matchbooks and menus and things. And people would start to find it on eBay, and then they would share it on Tiki Central. And I was like, oh my God, there's another new place that was, close by. And then I'd find places close to me just by driving around, actually. So that was also cool.
What aspects, though, of Tiki culture really like vibe for you, especially early on? Was it the artistry? Like, of course, you mentioned doing, the artistry aspect of it. Was it the vibe? What brings you into it? Was it just an appreciation for it as a whole, or the history? What sort of what drags you in? Everyone knows of tiki, but then there's obsessives like you and me who get dragged in. What was it
Yeah.
for you?
It was the whole like exotic escape, and I knew it was kind of a fantasy version of tropical history, and there was something kind of magical about that for me, especially. And I guess at the time too, when I started to dive into it, I had just started college. I was playing competitive baseball at the time, and my escape from all that of school and competitive baseball was surfing and tiki. So it was such a relief, and it fit better with my personality than playing baseball competitively. So I loved it. I loved the imagery of it. I grew up with two uncles who were full-time artists, and I always thought it would be so cool to do. And I was an artist always, but when I found tiki, it was like, oh, that's what I absolutely love. And I never thought I'd be able to do it for a career, just because I didn't think there would be enough people into it. And it only took 20 short years, but I was able to finally do it full time. So I'm super thankful.
What did you go to school for, though? I mean, clearly you didn't get a degree in tiki.
No. So I got an art degree, and then I continued and I got a teaching credential for teaching art. So I was an art teacher for about 5 years. And I ended up losing the art teaching job when the economy went down, when the housing crunch thing happened. So I cleaned pools for 5 years with my father-in-law. Thank God I was able to get that job, because there were no teaching jobs anywhere within, I don't know, an hour's drive of me. So clean pools, and at first it was a cool escape, but then after about year 3, I was like so over, especially like today is a super windy Santa Ana day. Those pools were a wreck, and and I was beat. So it was nice when the tiki thing was growing, and then through Instagram and Facebook and able to kind of share stuff and sell stuff. That's how I was able to quit doing pools and doing tiki full time.
Why do you think tiki like took off? And I know like tiki in theory the rebirth is, one might even say 90s, like there's a long tail of it, but it feels like right now it's bigger than it's ever been. Why do you think the resurgence has happened, especially now?
You know what? I often wonder that. And 20 years ago, I used to think, oh, I have about 10 years in this, and then it's probably going to die off. And it's only gotten stronger. I think because there's so many facets of tiki, there's music, there's the cocktail culture around it, there's mixology, there's the art, there's carving, there's mugs. So whatever type, like if there's something tropical that kind of takes your interest, there's all these other avenues within it to dive into. And there's also a cool community experience, like going to the Tiki Land trading events and stuff that I help put on. That's also been another cool thing. Seeing the way people interact with it, they'll either buy stuff or just get a drink and walk around. But everyone's just got like, I don't know what it's just like a kind of open and friendly atmosphere. And I think that's inviting to everybody, really.
So you mentioned having family that were artists. Did you grow up in a adventurous home, or what was your kind of artistic home life like?
Yeah, my parents were super supportive. I didn't ever think, and I don't think they ever thought it was going to be easy to be an artist full time. So my mom always kind of pushed me to go into something that would have been safe, like teaching, or I thought I was going to be a graphic designer, but I soon realized I was not very good at realizing other people's visions. So I kind of gave that up. But my parents were super supportive. My dad was always kind of an entrepreneur he would like buy and sell vintage toys. And that's kind of how I got into loving the old stuff like that as well, through my parents. They liked really mid-century Americana.
So let's talk a little bit about Adventureland, because you mentioned, of course, growing up and going to Disney once a year, enjoying the Tiki Room and that sort of thing. And now, of course, you're the founder of Adventureland Day, or one of the founders at least.
Yeah.
What was it about the land that piqued your interest? Was that an early, young age thing, or was it later after you got into Tiki that you went back and went, "Oh my gosh, this is everything that I that I want"? When did that happen for you?
It was a little of everything. I've always loved it. I've loved adventure kind of stuff. Always loved Indiana Jones growing up. Um, and it was really when I went, was able to do Tiki full time. I was like, what do I do? I have a little more free time now. And they used to do a day called Adventurers Day, and they stopped doing it. And I was like, now's the time I could finally actually do some stuff. Why don't they have it? And I messaged the people who used to put it on, and they're like, take it over if you want. So I changed the name to Adventureland Day. I just thought it was easier. And I went with it, and I love everything about Adventureland. Like the gates, when you walk through, there's all those old carved shields and skulls. And a lot of those shields were carved by Oceanic Arts in Whittier. They've been carving tiki since the mid 50s. But everything about Adventureland, like there's story, there's adventure, there's like Jungle Cruise, the Tiki Room, and then Swiss Family Robinson, which is now Tarzan's Treehouse. I don't know. As a kid, I always loved the idea of going on little adventures, and maybe I'm just a big kid who doesn't want to grow up and and go on funny little adventures, but probably not real ones because bugs and mosquitoes and that kind of thing. I kind of like to sleep in a nice warm bed as well.
So how many years has Adventureland Day been going on now?
Only 2. This one, March 1st, will be its third year.
In those 2 years, what have you seen in a shift? Is it surprised you, the positive reaction, or did you think, yeah, this is something that will take off? What was your reactions?
Oh my God! From the first one, people who have been going to Disneyland their whole life, they dressed up for the day in safari or Indiana Jones or Tiki, and they did my treasure map thing I organized, and so many people came up and said this was the funnest day they've ever had at Disneyland. And I was like blown away by that, because to me as a kid, going to Disneyland once a year was my highlight and kind of my funnest thing of the year to do. So for someone to say like a day that I helped organize with a group of friends was their most fun day, I was blown away. So I had a great group of friends who helped me. My buddy Chris Bonomo helped me, and Brooke, she also helped organize the first one. And then last year, we went full on and did a cool, another different type of treasure hunt. My buddy Joel and Ann Tanner, they really helped out. And they're the ones who started Tiki Land. And then consequently, we did Tiki Land Day, which was a Tiki version of Adventureland Day.
Now, these are over in California. Do you do them in Florida as well, or is that something you're expanding on?
Yeah, you know what? The very first year, I found this kid. He goes by Charles Adventurer Extraordinaire. He was already kind of dressing up in old-timey safari, and he lives in near Walt Disney World. So I contacted him. I was like, hey, would you want to head up the Walt Disney World version of Adventureland Day? And him and his group of friends took off, and they did this cool, different treasure hunt. And so they've been organizing it, and that's become their event, Adventureland Day, Walt Disney World.
That's awesome.
That's been fun. We haven't done Tiki Land Day in Walt Disney World yet.
I imagine that this event, though, has some crossover with another thing that you're a part of, which is Tiki conventions and such, where you sell mugs, as you said, and carvings and all that. What's the Tiki community like? Is it tight-knit? Do people go to, all over the country to every show, or is it very diverse? What are you getting into when you get into the Tiki Culture group?
You know what? It used to be a pretty small group, I would say, up until 3 years ago. Yeah, it was a lot of the same faces. It was cool to see everyone over and over. There were shows at Dawn the Beachcombers every 6 weeks or so. and then it closed. And then luckily, Joel and Ann Tanner took over, and they put on Tiki Land Trading. And once they did that, Joel is a marketer, so he was able to kind of bring in new people who were into Tiki but never really knew about events. So since then, it's crazy. It's been a new group of people who are super enthusiastic and have always kind of liked Tiki stuff, but never knew, there was an event. So now there's so many more people like building their own Tiki rooms or Tiki bars at their house, and it's rad. It's super cool to see all the new faces and everything.
So one of the things, of course, about you going to these events, you set up a booth, you do that whole thing, and sometimes you can see on your Instagram that you bring along your vehicle, which is a work of art in itself. I'm interested, and it's also a collaborative effort. Can you give us a little detail on the Indie Adventureland Rover and its origin story?
So that was super cool. A little before the first Adventureland day, maybe a year before, I drew an adventure kind of Land Rover vehicle, and it said, Disneyland Adventureland on it. And it was just like an idea. And a friend of mine, Chloe, she inherited a few old vehicles. She messaged me, and I think I even missed the message at first. She's like, I've got this old Land Rover. If you get it running and turn it into the drawing you did, you can have it. And I was like, no way, come on. And I literally thought it was just like too good to be true. And we finally went to go see it, and I figured it's just going to be a total wreck. There's no way I'll get it going. I had no extra income to kind of get another vehicle going or anything, and checked it out, and it was in pretty good shape. I found a mechanic in town. He worked on it, and it took about a month and of him doing it kind of in his off time. And he got it running, and it's been like running for a year and a half now consistently. And I was just driving it earlier. I drive it almost every day around town. I love it. So it's like from 48 to like the 70s, Land Rover basically made the same vehicle. It's just a very utilitarian looking Jeep. Or looks like a Jeep, I should say. And so when I got a hold of it, I was telling my buddy Trader Brandon, who he was the one of the Imagineers on making Trader Sam's come to life. He was like, "Oh, you got to have my buddy Typhoon Tommy rust paint it, and you got to put all the cargo on it." And I already wanted to do the cargo. I wasn't sure about the rust paint job, but he convinced me. And then at Tiki Oasis 2 years ago, in front of an audience and everything, Typhoon Tommy did his rust paint job all over it, and then we added some vintage stickers and some vintage like cargo items all around it and inside of it, and like just I brought it to life, made it look like it's fresh from an expedition. And when I set it up at events, I put a fog machine in the engine compartment and a light that simulates a flame, and so every 20 seconds or so, it looks like it's overheating. So there's skulls hanging off of it. There's pith helmets. There's spears. There's crates. All sorts of fun stuff like that around it.
I imagine you get looks on the highway.
Oh, yeah. All the time. And I've got, so Dr. Skipper Marley, he makes these cool signs that are reminiscent. They look like they're straight from the Jungle Cruise. So I think every single one he's made, I bought, and I put them all through the windows and on the dash. And yeah, people all the time stop me. I'll go back out to my car after running errands, and people are taking photos by it, or sometimes people will definitely look at me weird, like, is that thing safe to drive? Yeah, so it's fun.
Let's talk a little bit about your artistic interests beyond just your vehicle. You do several things, and one of them, of course, is wood carving. How'd you get into wood carving? And then did it happen before you started working in Tiki, or was it just sort of a thing from Tiki Culture that you decided you would try your hand at?
Well, I've always loved it. I was in 7th and 8th grade. We were blessed enough to have a wood shop. I loved it so much that you were only supposed to take it like for half the year, but I was able to somehow take it for the full year. but then I didn't do anything again with woodworking until I found Tiki when I was like 16 to 17. And then my wife's parents, she was my girlfriend at the time, they bought me a Dremel, and I just started dremeling little pieces of driftwood into tikis. And I was obsessed. I would just like sit there and carve for hours and hours. And I must have made, I, I, after a while, I made so many tiki necklaces and things. I started selling them. But I estimated I must have made about 2,000 of those little tiki necklaces over the course of, I don't know, the first 5 years or so.
Is there a carving that you have done? Because you've since then, of course, your carvings and work has been featured in tiki bars all over the country.
Oh yeah.
Is there a carving that you look back on and you're still like the most proud of?
There's quite a few at Hula's Tiki Room in Santa Cruz that I'm really proud of. I think there's 6 of them there. They're really big, kind of wide, and I think I did those about 10 or 12 years ago. There's 2 on the roof, but I kind of forget that they're there, and people will post a photo, and I'm like, oh god, those were fun. They were neat, and I feel like it was when my style transitioned from kind of basic to a little bit more in depth, and I was able to get a little more detail in them. So yeah, those for sure I'm proud of.
Now, it should be noted that you do much of your work in your Tiki Shack, which if you guys
Yeah.
thought that only his car was going to be totally themed up, the Shack is no different. Tell us a little bit about your creative space and how having an environment like that helps you be more creative.
Oh, it's like when I walk through the doors, I'm transported into, like, it looks like an Indiana Jones workshop. The back wall is made up of old fencing. There's old, like, fake looking antiques. There's some of my old carvings on the wall. Yeah, I'm instantly kind of transported to another place. I'm no longer in Ventura, California. I'm in the jungles of South America or Polynesia. It is invigorating. I absolutely love it. And then all around the shack, my wife has made our yard super tropical, just with plants that work here in Southern California. And it's our own little jungle. I love it, and I can't imagine working in an environment that doesn't inspire me every day. It was almost like I needed it. I don't even think I could do without it. I have to work in an environment that's like that.
Let's talk a little bit about your partnership with your wife, though. Did you drag her into Tiki Culture, or was she happy to be there? Because she's in it now, no matter what. So what was that sort of collaboration like for you? And of course, you have children as well. How was their experiences when it comes to being surrounded by theming?
My wife, at first, I think she wasn't too sure, but then after a few Tiki events we went to, she realized, like, oh, the people are super cool, laid back, and she was always an artist, so she would help me with the mugs at first, and then when I got a teaching job, so she took over making all the mugs, and then I didn't even have time to sculpt, so I would rough sculpt something, and then she would finish sculpt it, and then she got way better than me at sculpting. So she, for 10 years, was sculpting our mugs mostly. I would rough them out. She would do most of it, and then I would add in little details or make it a little bit better for the mold and everything. But now she's fully supportive, loves it. There's Tiki all over. So the front yard, we have the Land Rover. The backyard, we have the shack and the jungle. But in the house, there's not a ton of Tiki. I definitely sneak it in here and there, though.
Subtle.
But the inside of the house is kind of antiques and stuff like that. She likes classic antique stuff.
Run us through that process. I'm very curious about, you mentioned mugs. And I think I have some on my shelf, and Tiki mugs are like the thing. But it's one of those things where every time I look at one, and it's so different from the other ones I have, that I'm like, where does that process even begin? And both on the creative end and on the technical end, like how do you go from a real small idea to a fully fledged out thing? Not only just a fully fledged out thing, but like enough to put out into the world for, tons of people?
Yes, I mean everything kind of starts for me from drawing, or a lot of the times if I see something kind of the wrong way, I see it as a mug or how I can be a mug. And so I literally just start sketching. I love to sketch. I love to draw out ideas. Um, and I probably have hundreds of mug ideas drawn out that probably will never even become mugs, but there's a few gems in there that I can always go back to. So after the drawing, it used to be I would rough sculpt it out, then my wife would sculpt it. And then since the birth of our first daughter, a little over 3 years ago, then I've been getting friends to help me. So they sculpt for me. So my last mug was done by John Mulder, Ecum Bookum in Florida. And then I've had a few made in overseas now. So now with Tiki Land, we've been making our own mugs. So there's that's been another cool option, is I haven't been limited just by the time I have and my sculpting abilities, because there's people I've found that can sculpt my design much better than I can. So that's been super cool.
Over the years, what lessons do you think you've learned about mug making that you wish you knew when you started?
You know what? I've always kept the mugs pretty simple, and I think as long as you have a simple, bold design, you're going to get your best result. I think now, like, I definitely like a layered look to the mugs, and in the beginning, we used to kind of just maybe not experiment enough with glazing, and so now just layering of glazes and stuff like that.
Now, I would be remiss if I keep talking about tiki mugs and I don't ask you about tiki drinks. What is your favorite tiki drink to sip out of one of your tiki mugs?
You know what? Honestly, like when we go to a new tiki bar, I usually just order the Mai Tai. It's kind of like the go-to. If the Mai Tai is good, then I'll move on. Ventiki is near us. My probably favorite drink there is the Mai Tai. Close behind is the Jet Pilot. It's just like a little bit of a cinnamony version of a Mai Tai. And then I also like some of the like creamy, like the coconut chi-chis, stuff like that.
So let me ask you about the future of both Tiki Tony stuff and Adventureland. What are your hopes and dreams for the years to come?
I hope to keep designing fun stuff that I've always wanted that hasn't been out there. I've been able to work with a few of my friends. I love that. I love having friends that are cool to work with that can work side by side with me, either at events or helping me make stuff. And just kind of grow it from there, and like connecting with people who are into it. Like I love seeing people's versions of their tiki room, and like how they take my carving and put it a certain way, or make a different looking shelf out of an old crate or something. It's so cool to see how the customers kind of creatively do their own thing with the things that I'm making.
To finish up here, your work has been featured in Trader Sam's Enchanted Tiki Bar at Disneyland. And I'm curious, what do you think the impact Disney has had on the tiki community as a whole, both in currently its sort of resurgence and with the Trader Sam's bars, but also with classic things like the Adventureland attractions?
So right when Trader Sam's was opening, I knew that was going to bring in a lot more people. Just the way Disney does things. And at first I was worried because I loved Tiki so much. I was worried they were going to do a watered down version of it. And thank goodness Trader Brandon was able to get behind that and make Trader Sam's what it was, or what it is. It's a fun, adventurous tiki bar that there's cool things on the wall. And I think for many people, that's their first tiki bar experience. So for me, it's been amazing. Like a few people will find my painting up behind the bar, and so a lot of the bartenders, thank goodness, they'll ask them, and they kind of point them my way. And a lot of people find me that way, just literally from seeing it at Trader Sam's in California, or the Trader Sam's in Walt Disney World, I have a few mugs behind the bar on the permanent display, and then one little painting of a whale that's kind of above the exit sign, and then a mask here and there. But I I thank Disney for bringing new people into it, because I really don't know if I'd be able to make a career out of tiki culture if it wasn't for kind of the Disney popularization of it, really. And I'm sure some would argue, but yeah, I love it. And obviously, I'm a Disney fan, but we go every few weeks, and we live about 2 hours away, so it's not exactly like a short trip.
Well, Tiki Tony, thank you so much for being on Dreamfinders. It's been a blast to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and thank you.
And that's it for this episode of Dreamfinders. Thanks so much to Tiki Tony for chatting with me, and you can find out more about his work at tikitony.com, or follow him on Instagram at Tiki Tony. He's always had something fun going on, and I highly recommend it. Dreamfinders is edited by Shannon Mickelson. It's hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at Some Stuff I Said. Our podcast artwork is provided by JP Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This podcast is distributed by WDW News Today, the worldwide leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at WDWNT.com. Tell your friends about the show, and please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on this program, feel free to email us at dreamfinders@WDWNT.com. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it. Dreamfinders is sponsored by Never Grow Up Vacations, the official travel partner of WDWNT.com. Never Grow Up Vacations specializes in trips to Disney destinations around the world, so be like us and never grow up. Head over to nevergrowupvacations.com to book your next trip today.